And we sat there in someone's living room, and I remember I took a nice, cushy middle chair in the middle of the room, and then a rabbi started to speak. And I remember one line he said that just, was a paradigm shift, flipped my whole life inside out forever. He said, "You Western intellects, you thinkers." And I said, "Oh, he's got the right crowd over here, Okay. Yeah, he talking to me. Yeah, okay. He said, he says, "You think God is in your little world." Yeah, he said, "No, you got it all wrong," he said. He says, "You live in God's world."
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have an incredibly interesting guest. His name is Rabbi Label Lamb. He is a former collegiate athlete and poet. He is a speaker and educator and a principal in a school here in Muncie, New York. Thank you, Rabbi Lamb, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Welcome.
you. So I'm intrigued with your story. So I'll let you take it off and tell us a little about your background and how you got to where you are today, from this collegiate athlete to a rabbi, principal, speaker, educator.
Okay. So, I know when I meet all kinds of audiences, whether they're college students or anybody, there's a tendency to profile and they take a look and they wonder, where did you grow up? Where in Brooklyn or where in Lakewood or whatever? And they're always surprised to find out that I went to public school in a little town called Eastchester in the county of Westchester. You can already hear the contradiction over there, the conflict. Go east, young man. Go west, young
Go
man.
West. Right.
And there was not much in that town. My parents moved there because my grandfather opened up a diner, and my father went to join the family business. And there was a local synagogue, but basically the education that was being provided was Hebrew school leading up to the bar mitzvah, and the bar mitzvah was the last day of education, the Jewish education. And I had two older brothers that had their bar mitzvahs ahead of me, and I saw they got a lot of checks, and they chanted a haftorah. Came my turn, and
Right.
and I did the same. I remember I got a 78 record. I don't know if anybody remembers what those things are, from the cantor with his muscular cantorial, Baruch yeah, and I memorized it for 6 weeks. He played it over and over again, until I was able to perform in public, and I did my half Torah, and I always wondered when do
Right.
I get the other half of the Torah. I
Right.
knew I knew I'm missing something, but that was it. That was really basically the end of the Jewish education. I was in public school, and all the
What
Jewish, yeah.
were you curious about Judaism, or it wasn't even on your
Uh,
radar at that
and,
point?
and the truth is, I was
Hmm.
deeply, I was, and sincerely, I was. But I don't think there was anybody around who was really capable of providing anything other than some Israeli songs,
Hmm.
or, in Hebrew school, I think after, all those years, all I really remember is Sheket Vavakasha. That was really,
Right.
we knew how to drive the teachers crazy. And if we got kicked out of Hebrew school, then that was a good day because there was a candy store across the street. So
Of course,
the,
right.
the teachers were either they didn't know too much about Judaism. So
Mhm,
I
mhm,
actually went on for another year of what they called Hebrew high school,
mm,
and I was, deeply disappointed with who was joining at that time and what we were learning about. Everything seemed to be about, the dark side of Jewish history, about pogroms and these type of things. And I'm saying,
mhm.
okay, but nothing practical, nothing inspiring for me. So I faded that out. And but in school, the school that I was at, sports were everything. All the Jewish kids were at the tops of all the clubs and everything. And I turned out to be, I had 10 letters in high school varsity sports. I was captain of the high school football team, captain of the high school
Yeah.
basketball team, captain of the high school baseball team.
Oh, wow. So that sounds
And
so common for a Jewish boy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right?
And as a matter of fact, people wrote in my yearbook, for the other, friends of mine, my Italian and Irish Catholic friends, they wrote, for a Jewish guy, you're a good athlete.
Right. Right.
And I was also treasurer of the choir, although my kids don't believe I was ever in any choir, and my wife doesn't believe I was ever the treasurer of anything. And I had very little contact with anything that had to do with religion. except I
Mhm.
worked in a local store at night on top of all the extracurricular activities, and I was bussing tables and washing dishes. And the store was run by a bunch of born again. I
Mm.
like to say to this holy audience over there, born again,
Mm. Mhm.
JC, not Johnny
Mhm.
Carson. You know what I'm talking about,
Right,
right?
right.
And they were always trying to anoint me. They were always trying
Mhm.
to like pour oil on top of my head. I was a catch for them, and I was always dodging them and telling them, guys, I'm not the salad. Leave me alone. But
Right.
but but then after we finished cleaning up the place, we go out in the parking lot. We play football. So we throw the ball around in the parking lot, and part of football is getting into a huddle. I remember in the huddle they were trying to force me onto my knees, and we're going to do a
Mhm.
little prayer thing right there in the parking lot. And maybe I remembered also from Hebrew school that a Jew does not get down on his knee.
Mhm.
So I begged away, and they said, "But look at the stars in the sky." I said, "What does that have to do with some guy that died 2,000 years ago? Please don't, you know." And plus,
Mhm.
my brother had the highest IQ ever recorded in the school district, and we had some high-minded, Western intellectual discussions in our house. It was like a study hall, a liberal arts based medrash before I even
Mm.
went to college. And I told them, you're not going to make a quick sale on me. I'm going to go to the
Mm.
university. I'm going to read the great historians, the great philosophers, and the great, literary minds, and then I'll make up my mind and decide, what I should dedicate my life to. And everything I did with all my heart and all my soul and all my might. So I'll figure it out. Once I figure it out, then I'll go with passion in that direction.
Interesting. So there was a part of you that didn't wanna bow down or that knew that you were a Jew. There was, like, a small part that really
Oh,
understood what you
oh,
were
oh yeah.
always.
It was that I always had a number like 18 on my uniform. I felt a certain,
Really?
I felt
Like, for chai.
yeah, yeah. I felt that there was a Jewish pride, and the Jewish kids knew each other. That's one thing we picked up in Hebrew school. We didn't know how to relate, but we identified that, we're Jews. There was like a wink and a nod in all those relationships.
So
Uh,
you felt that you were different in some way.
oh yeah, we knew we were Jewish, but we just didn't know what to do about it.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
what
I got
happened next?
So I ended up getting a full scholarship to Colgate University, and I did my 4 years. And after handing in my last religion and philosophy paper, all of my friends they went on to jobs in corporations and Wall Street, or to law school and medical school. But I didn't feel I had a clarity on what it was I should be running after, and I called it at that time the fast track to nowhere. Where's everybody
Mm.
running to? I'm going to take out a loan. I didn't have a loan, but I'm going to now, commit myself to like a 20, 30-year forward project. And like, I know I'm glad they knew what they wanted to do. And I
Mhm.
ran to the end of the movie and I imagined to myself, I don't know where this idea came from. I said, let's say I'd be successful and I get a job with IBM and I'll work for 50 years and I'll retire somewhere in the northern suburbs of Westchester County with a fancy car and maybe at that time a station wagon or something like that. And I'll have 1.7 kids and a dog, and I'll
Mhm.
be lying in the on a like an outdoor furniture in the backyard, sunning myself one summer day, and with my
Mm.
gold watch, and I'll look up at the sky, a blue sky, perfectly blue with a little puffy white cloud for perspective, and a bird flies by. I worked out the scene in my brain, and the bird flies by. He goes to the horizon, and I sit up in my chair and say, "What was I supposed to do with my life anyway?" And then
Mm.
fade into oblivion. Not
Mm.
realizing what was I put here for? What am I supposed to be doing over here? And so I put on my proverbial yellow blinkers, and I let everybody, do whatever it was that they were doing, and
Mm.
I ended up doing all kinds of different odd jobs. I'm not gonna, I tried my hand at building. Certain things I was pretty good at, and certain things I just, didn't enjoy doing on a regular basis. I was a bouncer in a bar in Brookline, Massachusetts, and in Boston. And I enjoyed moving. That was one of the things I liked doing. I worked for a moving company, but a bunch
Mm.
of other there were fellows that were in the various stages of their academic career, and they were jocular and muscular, and we used to discuss things. We used to pick up books and read them, and stay in shape, and get a deep visit into somebody's life when you were moving them. And I would hitchhike everywhere I went. And at
Mm.
some point, I realized that I'm hitchhiking here and I'm hitchhiking there, And I like looking into seeing like almost like an anthropologist looking into other people's lives and seeing what's this about. And at some point, I realized it's easy to make fun of things. It's easy to. I was a little bit comedic at the time. I knew how to lead people, but I didn't know how to create anything. I didn't have an affirmative stance. And I realized if somebody would hitchhike past my life, they'd only see me hitchhiking past their life. Where's
Wow.
where's
Wow.
my affirmative stance in life? What am I? What do I live for? What do I stand for? It was the times of Saturday Night Live where it was easy to break things down ad absurdum, ad nauseum, and to make fun of everything. But and I had that art pretty good, but I didn't know how to establish anything.
So you were
And
kinda drifting through life, and
yeah,
you
yeah,
knew
yeah,
that, and you saw
yeah,
yourself drifting through that life,
yeah.
and you didn't like that.
Yeah, I know. That doesn't feel comfortable.
Mhm.
As an all-American Jewish boy, the only tradition I had is I have no tradition. We got to figure
Mhm.
it out. And no,
Mhm.
nobody, said this is what you need to do or this is what you should do. And so at some point, a clarion voice, sort of rang in my mind that said, "Make a difference in somebody else's life." Wow. I don't know
Mhm.
where it came from. A
Mhm.
grandparent, it just welled up from the inside. And at that same moment, I get a call from a black-skinned Puerto Rican friend of mine that was a year ahead, graduated a year ahead from college. I was always close with the inner city kids in the
Mhm.
university. I liked them. They had a certain ethnicity to them that and a heart that I really I connected
Right.
to. And so my friend Louis Matos, he says, I like the way you are with people. I opened up a center in the Bronx for Puerto Rican kids who are dropouts to help them get job experience and at the same time to catch up and get their GEDs.
Mhm.
So I came down to join the school, and I remember when I visited, I met 80 students. They were coming through and saying hello and introducing themselves, and I was talking to them a little bit. And at the end of the day, I felt like this guy with the bumper sticker on his back of his car that said, "Don't follow me, I'm lost myself." I'm going to lead them where I'm going to do, and it started me thinking that if I'm going to jump in the water and save someone who's drowning, I better learn how to swim myself, or I better be anchored
Mhm.
to something. And I say, what am I moored to? What am I, where's my solid piece of ground that I'm holding on to? And so it left me with, now I have to be a little bit more practical about, what's solid, what lasts, what's important. And one of the things we used to do was invite speakers to talk to the kids because my success didn't translate into. I came from a middle income suburb, and now they're living in a different environment entirely. So we used to ask the people that they were working at, maybe you'll come speak to the students, and all of them came down, whoever I asked. And there was this one I remember, this nice, handsome, chisel jawed. Well groomed, like a Sidney Poitier, or now we say like an Obama type,
Mhm.
fella. And I said, maybe you'll come down and speak to the students, and I think they would gain a lot from you. And he says he doesn't want to come to the school. I said, Why not?" He says, "I want to speak to them, but not at the school." I said, "Where then?" He said, "The Metropolitan Museum of Art." I
Mhm.
said, "Okay." So we arranged two buses. 80 students came down to the Metropolitan Museum of Art on a Tuesday morning. It was a day my life was going to change, and I didn't realize what was going to happen. And he showed them black art and Indian art and Spanish art. And that was it. That was the limit of what he showed them. And he took one of the students in front of each, like in front of a Spanish fresco, and he said, "It doesn't look like Julio," and everybody had a good laugh. And the black African mask, "It doesn't look like Juan," and everybody had a good laugh.
Mhm.
And then in front of an Indian totem, and "Does not look like Juanita," oh, and everybody had a good laugh. And then he sat them down on the marble floor of the hallowed halls of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he had one of those lecterns that the conductors use, and he went into his black Baptist ministerial tones, and he started saying very good stuff. He said, "The reason why I brought you here is that inside the Puerto Rican personality, there's three streams. There's black and Indian and Spanish, and I know that sometimes the Spanish part doesn't like the Indian, and the Indian doesn't like the black man. The black." He says, "There's a civil war going on inside. We're splintered." And he says, "Unless you can make peace with yourself, you can't make peace with the world." And I'm saying,
Mhm.
wow, that's like
Mhm.
Jungian
Mhm.
archetypal psychology go on there. I knew which bookshelf he was speaking from. He was saying it nice. That's what academic training does for you. And then at some point, he said, "In order to know where you're going to, you got to know where you're coming from." I said, "Wow, I was really digging it." They had 80 students
Mhm.
sitting there, and they were listening, and I'm sort of like somewhat disassociated, a little bit remote, watching them, watch him. And he says, in order to know where you're going to in life, you got to know where you're coming from. And
Hmm.
then he pivoted to me and he says, Bob over here, that's my English name. He says he knows where he comes from. He's a son
Hmm.
of Abraham, right?
Hmm.
And suddenly he throws me this bounce pass over here, son of Abraham. I felt like Bambi on the highway with the headlights bearing down, like. And that wasn't my bar mitzvah portion. It wasn't my brother's bar mitzvah portion. I have no idea. And
Right.
and I
Did
had
you know
maybe
who Abram was?
my mind started working. It's like one of these things, if somebody asks you your name, you better come up with an answer. So
Right.
in hyper speed, my first reaction, inner reaction was, and I deleted it, was anti-Semitism. But he didn't say anything
Mm,
pejorative. And
mm.
the next reaction was, "Hey, this is a government program, and you just broke that sacred wall between government. We spent federal
Right.
funds to get down here." And I realized he didn't say anything about religion. He just asked me, "Son of Abraham." My mind flashed back to fourth grade in Hebrew school, underneath in the downstairs classrooms over there, where we opened up. Someone got me a copy of it recently. This little brown book with like heavy cloth pages. In the third chapter, I remember they had a title page over there that pictured a man and a woman, like a sketch of a man and woman wearing white robes, like Lawrence of Arabia, schlepping a couple of camels behind them. And the bottom third of the page is talking about a man named Abraham and a woman named Sarai
Yeah.
that came from a city called Ur. That's how they were titled. It's
Mm,
on the map in Iraq as Ur.
mm.
And I think I remember it well only because I might have started a contagion of shaka baka sha, and I got thrown out at that moment over there.
Right.
But suddenly my mind flashed back to that lesson and that page over there, and he said, "Bob over here, he knows where he comes from. He's a son of Abraham, right?" And I said, "That's right," and I agreed to
Mm,
it publicly. Now that I
mm.
agreed that I'm a son of Abraham publicly, they say before you say the word, you own the word. After you say the word owns you.
You,
So
wow.
now I went back, running back to my parents' house where we had thousands of books before we went to university, and thousands now since we went to university. I started scouring the bookshelf, and there were three black Bibles that we received from the Genesis Hebrew Center on the occasion of our bar mitzvahs. And since I was the youngest one, I could tell, and they were the only three books that were never touched and never used. I could tell from the gentle geologic slope of dust on top which one was mine. I guessed right. I opened up Robert Lamb, and I started thumbing through, and I came to Abraham. And here I find this man at the age of 75, starting out on the journey with a childless, barren wife and capable of having children, voted in his high school class least likely to make it into the 20th or now the 21st century. And that is my great, 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 I spare you a couple of greats, grandfather, going all the way back. Said, wow, that is unbelievable. I know who my
Mm,
great great. I went back to the library, started doing research, and I'm just wondering if the Chinese and Indian or any other culture that claims antiquity, if anybody walking around can say with certainty that I know have credible information who my great 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 grandfather is. If you're Chinese, are you related to King Ming or any of these people that we know from back then? And I started, my heart was swelling with pride, and I'd ride on the subway and look around and look out at people and saying, I don't think anybody, I think I'm the only living boy in New York. I'm the only one who knows
mm,
about this. This is the big
mm.
secret. And my heart was pounding with incredible pride. And at some point, I'll tell you what happened was, I flipped the script and I realized I was carrying on like that for many, many weeks, maybe even a couple of months. And at some point, a question woke up in my mind. I realized I'm looking at it completely wrong. Not completely wrong, but I'm looking at it from my self-centered perspective and saying, I know who my great, 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 great grandfather is, going down the highway of history way back 3,700 years ago. And at some point I said, you know, how did Abraham and Sarah, how were they able to cast their influence 3,700 years into the future?
Mm,
And the real question that aches inside of me is, what type of parent or grandparent would I have to be in order that my children, my grandchildren should care who I was and what I lived for? And the dirty
wow.
little secret that accompanied that is, who wanted to have children? Why would I bring a
Mm,
child into this? polluted world. That was
Mhm.
the awareness at the time, and there was a sort of Damocles. There was a Cold War going on, and the possibility of a thermonuclear,
Mm.
mutual destruction between United States and Russia. And I said, who, and what songs would I teach them anyway?
Mhm.
The last thing you want to do is take somebody. When I take my kids for a ride anytime, where they say, "Where are we going? How long?" If you don't know
Right.
where you're going, you can't drag somebody else along on a journey that you don't know where you're going.
Mm.
And so, children were not on my radar screen at that time. But
Mhm.
so I started thinking a lot about, and I didn't have a place to go to. I didn't have a teacher. I
Mhm.
learned later on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, "Kadei lachachaver, acquire yourself a friend." And I saw that the Kav Yashar says that a connect can be a pen. Let your pen be your friend. And I still have these tall yellow pads that I wrote. I started writing on the top of the page. I let my pen be my friend. I started writing after all these papers I wrote for university and everything I got tested on and all the school and everything. What do I know?
Mm.
And I started writing to the bottom of the page. And I was amazed that when I got just emptying out
What, you just started writing, like, your thoughts? What were you writing?
whatever, unedited, just like
Mhm.
brainstorming and let it all out. Just let out. I have no one to ask. And I'm burning inside, uh, you know, w-
So many
how did,
questions, right.
just even that one question, until a person asked the question, that's the way he asks questions, the Pesach Seder.
Mm.
Some anonymous philosopher said there's nothing more irrelevant than the answer to a question that was never asked. But once a
Wow.
person pressed the quest button or the go button or the question button, boom, then suddenly answers begin to flood. So I think it was because I was asking that question, I started, searching deep inside. And Shlomo Melech, the wisest of all men, says, "Maya mumukim eitza b'lev ish, v'ish tuvuni yadalenu." That there's deep counsels of water inside of a person, and we have to find clever ways to access it. So I think one of the
Mm.
my method, my only method I had left, I didn't know who to ask. I didn't have anybody available. I started writing and
Mm.
writing for myself, and I would get down to the bottom of the page, and there was always a word that was pulsing on the bottom of every page, no matter where I was started, and I was very surprised. I'd ask a question on the top and get to something on the bottom, and it was the word one.
One. Wow.
One, one, one. It would narrow, narrow, narrow down to the point, and I'd say one, and I'd say, where does that come from? And I realized as a Jewish boy going to sleep every night, I would cover my eyes and I would say, math, English, social studies, science, because those are the subjects that we were studying, and I was obligated to write a paper on or to study a chapter. And when you get to university, it was the interdisciplinary weave. Now it's the art of the science of history and the math of the sociology of the. Now they start to do the discipline between all the. And I remember seeing one French philosopher who said, "All science is one."
Mm.
And at some point, I realized that the world is a there's a it's a piece of one reality, and we have these intellectual interpositions that we put in that you drove from now New York to New Jersey, but you're still on one planet in one
Mm.
car. It's just
Mhm.
when did you trip over the equator? So we have to
Mm.
we have these ideas. In any case, um, I would do something called cutting and pasting. Nowadays it means something different, and I would take the best of things that I wrote. And at one point, I think I sort of put into a separate book one idea. I think that was my first real solid answer for how did Abraham and Sarah push their way and make their influence felt so far into the future. And my kids know it, by heart. And I imagine that we're out in the country someplace, and you throw a pebble into a calm lake, and it creates those concentric
Ripples.
ripples. Yeah, and then
Mhm.
and then the pebble settles to the bottom of the pond, and everything goes back to a cool piece of ice, like it undisturbed again.
Mhm.
And so I wrote for myself the following. I have a picture of it over here. I don't know if it comes up backwards by you or right. I don't know, but you
Hard to
imagine.
see clearly, yeah.
Okay,
You should.
okay. Good. I'll
Yeah.
I'll 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 say it twice. Pebbles and ponds are our ponderings,
Mm.
but boulders and oceans were our father's notions, whose waves still rock the sea, whose waves still rock the sea.
Mm.
Pebbles and ponds are our ponderings, but
Mm.
boulders and oceans were our father's notions, whose waves still rock the sea, whose waves still rock the sea. And
Mm.
imagine that a boulder hit the earth 3,700 years ago, and we don't know the velocity or the density, or the velocity, and it hit the ocean and settled to the bottom of the ocean. But somehow it's still affecting the tide of humanity. It's still the Jewish people are still have a certain presence and vibrance, and I realized it had little to do with Abraham's and Sarah's military might or political connections, but more to do with a certain idea that they had.
Mhm.
And I decided, if let me find out what that idea was that they had,
Mhm.
that was able to, make such a profound impact. So because I was thinking like that, all those crazy thoughts, I became available to the idea of going to the Garment Center Synagogue in Midtown Manhattan, where they had like 14 or 15 elderly people. And people, my friends would ask me, when no matter where it was Friday night, I would show up there on Saturday morning for, many, many, many consecutive weeks. My friends would ask me, like, where you going? Who goes there? Not the Shakespearean who goes there, like, and since everybody was over the age of 86, I would say the average age is deceased,
Right. Right.
And that joke is getting less funny as I'm getting older
Right.
myself. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, but they were all mumbling. There was no direction about what page we're on or anything like that. And I sat in the back with the old Hertz Chumash. I don't know if you remember that
Mm,
one with the commentaries from St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Birnbaum Siddur. This was all before
mm,
Art Scroll and
mm.
even the Chabad Siddur, which
Right.
I was enchanted by when I finally came to that one, and
Right.
I never knew what page we're on. I'm flipping pages and looking at the English side, and it's tickling my mind, even in archaic English. And I'm looking at the Hebrew side, like Moses looking at the promised land. I said, I knew how to read a few words because for the bar mitzvah, the
Mhm.
Hebrew school
Right.
training, but I didn't know what anything meant. I said, if I could, tunnel into those words over there and figure them out, I want to find out what those black squigglies are about. Then,
Mm,
who knows what that could, how that would interact, what kind of chemistry that would create internally. And so I found myself looking and longing to understand what's inside those black squiggly lines. There was
mm.
only one area where I really felt comfortable in that whole setting, where they used to call me up all the time for some mystical reason. That was for Hagba, Jewish weightlifting. I would lift up the Torah. All the old men would come onto the bima. I remember at that time, and they would all, I was a young athletic fella. They, pat me on my shoulder, and they'd be looking at each other, and I'd hear them saying, "Louis, a young one." I'm the only.
Yeah.
But by 70 years, 60 years, I'm the youngest one there. And I knew in the streets of the Bronx where I was working, there's another hundreds and thousands of Julios and Juans with guns and knives and drugs and things that are happening. And I'm the only Jewish kid. And they look at me like, "You're the future. You're the hope."
Mm.
And I'm saying, if I'm the future and we're the hope, we're in big trouble. You
Oh,
know,
right. Right.
I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know what anything means. I don't know if they would all leave tomorrow.
Mm,
There would be nobody.
mhm,
And so I remember I went to the rabbi and I told him, I remember I had been in Israel on a kibbutz for a semester in college, and and I remember I came to Jerusalem one time, and with a Gentile friend of mine, we ditched our backpacks and we used to go to a Hasidic tish on a Friday night. And a bunch of guys dancing around in a circle with beards saying, "We want rain." I don't know what they were doing,
mhm,
but we went
mhm,
around and it was the revolving door, and we went out. And I remember seeing that was the only times I ever saw anybody, with, these guys with the black hats and the beards, except maybe in a Woody Allen movie when he was feeling extra guilty about something, those images would appear. And so I told the rabbi, I said, I'm going to hitchhike to Israel. I wasn't afraid of anything, wasn't afraid of anybody. I'll hitchhike, bearing
mhm,
straight. I'll find my way there. And he felt, you can get lost between here and there. And he set me up for a Pagisha, a Shabbaton that was taking place in Crown Heights.
Crown Heights. Wow.
And I remember
Wow.
that Friday afternoon, I got on the Cross Bronx Expressway for where I was working in the Bronx, and my car got hit and it spun around twice. My heart was pounding.
Oh.
I got to the, I got to the place, and this nice man with a long beard came out, Rabbi Kestel. Okay, and he
Mhm.
came to greet me, and suddenly he starts taking my blood pressure. I don't know why he's taking my blood pressure and fitting me up.
Robbing Tefillin, right.
Yeah, and it says Shema Yisrael. And I'm reading, say, okay, that was cool, that was nice. Okay, they set me up by a beautiful family. I have the name of the family. I'm in touch with them recently to tell them you have no idea from that Shabbos how many Shabbos
Wow.
have been produced from that Shabbos with my kids and everybody. And he set me up for a nice family. And that was one thing that was amazing. I was just amazed to see a whole family sitting around the hearth of a table,
Mhm.
I don't remember anything anybody said, but maybe it wasn't what wasn't said. They weren't fighting over which channel we're going to watch, and it was like
Mm.
there was a certain relaxed harmony over there,
Was
and
it your first exposure to
first, yeah,
Torah observant Jews? Wow.
first, number one,
Wow.
first time.
Mm,
I had maybe one time seen my own great grandfather who passed on when he was 86 and I was 15 that summer. I
mm,
saw him putting on tefillin one time. I
mhm,
opened up a door where he spent the latter part of his life in Yonkers. I opened up a door and I saw him with tefillin on, and I closed the door.
mm,
I said, "I wonder what's
mm.
going on there. Does Grandma know about that?" You
Right,
know,
right. Wow.
I didn't know.
Wow.
I didn't know what I'm looking at, what I'm witnessing, but I never saw. And my mother used to light Shabbos candles, and my grandmother lit Shabbos candles. So there was a,
Really?
and whenever I'd ask my mother to, can you fix my uniform? Can you, no, not on Shabbos, So there was a little bit of
Really?
that flavor from amongst all my friends. We were the ones that at least had a little bit of that, lingo left with us,
Right.
but we didn't. I never saw a full experience. It was an immersion. And then on that Friday night, we went out. I went out. And I met another, 25 other people.
Mm. Like
Wow,
yourself.
like myself, and I felt like a
Mhm,
mountain climber that came up to the top of a mountain to a plateau, and found out that other people climbing up from other sides came to the same place
mm,
with all
mhm.
the intuitive thinking and the empirical work that I was doing. I saw other people came, and I said, "Wow!" It was a confirmation that we're discovering the same things at the same time. I'm not
That
alone in the journey. Yeah,
that must have been a big wow moment because here all
yeah,
these years that you're thinking all these questions and you're thinking you're alone and you're the only one that's looking for it, and here
right,
are all
right.
these other people. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That would, yeah, that, yeah. Maybe I never emphasized it or thought about it, how much of a difference that made to me, just to realize that there were other people who were finding the same thing and going through the same search
Mhm,
simultaneously. It was great.
mhm.
And then we sat there someone's living room, and I remember I took a nice, cushy middle chair in the middle of the room, and then a rabbi started to speak. It was Matis Friedman,
Manus Friedman.
Manis Friedman, right?
Right.
And
Wow.
I remember one line he said that just, was a paradigm shift, flipped my whole life inside out
What
forever.
was that? What was that?
He said, "You Western intellects, you thinkers." And I said, "Oh, he's got the right crowd over here, Okay. Yeah, talking to me. Yeah, okay."
Yeah.
He said, "You think God is in your little world." He says, "Okay, what does 60
Mhm.
Minutes have to do with a Jewish mother?" Yeah, he said, "No, you got it all wrong," he said. He says, "You live in God's world."
Mm,
And suddenly my whole life inverted at that moment, because from the Western intellectual posture that I've been wearing all these years is that, God, prove yourself to me.
mm,
My mind is the measure of all things. If you want me to believe in you, then do an Irish jig. Then split
mm,
a sea for me. Show me
mhm,
that you exist. And then I realized, not like the song says, pardon me, Mick, time is not on my side. And maybe
mhm,
because my car got hit or whatever it is, and I felt like I better prove to God that I exist, and that there's
mhm,
something different between me and that squirrel on the side of the road, or the cockroach in my apartment that I had to eliminate. What
mm,
makes me special? What makes me
mhm.
important? And I walked away from that Shabbos, with the Armaka on my head.
Wow.
And I remember, like Motzi Shabbos, the mother in the house, she was cleaning up the dishes. She was by the sink, and I was writing, like I always did. I was writing notes for myself, still do. And there was a Jewish radio program in the background, and something caught my attention. There was a song I realized, by the Magama Duo band, Moshe Yes,
Mhm,
and it started to sound like, wow, that's hauntingly familiar. It reminded me of my great grandfather, who I remember very,
mhm,
very well. He was that old Yiddish style, personality, and everybody else went to university and they became sophisticated, and then everybody disappeared. And so, but Zadie made us laugh.
mhm,
Zadie made a kiddish Friday night. Zadie, oh my Zadie, how I loved him so. And then some we stopped being Jewish, and somehow, and then I went to summer camp to run and play, and they told me Zadie's gone and all those
mhm.
books are packed away. And now he says, now I'm looking at my child and I'm saying, who will be the Zadie of our children, of my child? Who will be the Zadie of our children? Who will be their Zadie if not we? And he goes back to the fun Diddy song, Zadie made us laugh. But my eyes open up like faucets and I was crying my eyes out, not even knowing why. What do we, who will be the Zadie of our children?
Well, that was the question that you had asked yourself so long
Yeah,
ago, right at the
yeah, yeah,
beginning of the
yeah,
journey.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And now I
Wow.
started to feel like, wow, that I didn't want to have children, but now maybe I saw like a little bit of a model
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
what could be, and that captured my. I had won sports championships. I was the top athlete in high school. I had trophies. I have all kinds of different things. I went to the Colt League World Series. I struck out 15 Mexicans in a 7 inning game. I knew what success felt like in a lot of areas, but it was all empty calories. It was like watching the fireworks and then it's over. It's like, okay, is that all there is? As Peggy Lee
Wow.
used to say. But when I saw this, I felt this was deeply gratifying and satisfying, and it became like, I can't shake that picture. I came back to my parents' house after that Shabbos with the Armaka now on my head.
So why were you wearing a yarmulke? What made you decide to wear the yarmulke?
I'm living in God's world.
Mhm.
And a
Mhm.
few little other phrases I had, and everything is one, and
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
just armed with those few little, and I'm a son of Abraham, just few little
Mhm.
catchphrases that I had. So,
Mhm.
so
Wow.
I come back like if I'm living God's world. So this is
Right.
this is how I express it. Yarmulke, it is, it's not my world.
So
I'm a bottom fish over here, and I have to, humbly, uh, prove myself, that I have some worth and some value. So wow,
and what was your parents' reaction?
oh, so they were having a barbecue. I remember that Sunday I came back. It was like I think it was a Memorial Day, barbecue. All their
Mhm.
friends from Long Island, Ros and Mac. They were all named Ros and Mac, and they had
Right.
and they were like 10 Mercedes lined up on the street. I have this picture in my mind, and I came in, and they were flipping burgers in the backyard and everything. And I came in, and suddenly, I have everybody like, 10 Jackie Masons telling me, oh, what today, a Jewish holiday? Oh, who are you, the Pope? Oh,
Right.
And I said, no, I told them, I live in God's world. And they go,
Mhm.
Roz, let's go to the Mercedes and go back to, let's get out of here. They were
Right.
totally
This is
alarmed
scary.
yeah,
Right.
and totally, they couldn't take it. That was more than they were ready to hear. And my mother sort of said, I don't think they're ready to hear this. Not right now. They're not into that right now. So,
Right.
she shepherded me to my room, got me a hamburger, I stayed out of the way. And when it came time to going back to work on Monday morning, so I realized I started the job without a yarmulke on my head. What do I do?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and now and I was doing some writing and thinking, and then I realized, oh, I got so involved with it, I'm late. Now I got to go back to work. And do I wear this? I poskined for myself. I decided halakhically for myself, whatever. Not, I was interested in the halakha, but what's the right thing to do? I decided I'll get there. I'll park my yarmulke in my pocket or in the glove compartment, and I'll put it back on. I don't want to.
Mhm.
I can't change the rules in the middle of the game. And
Mhm.
so what happened was, I was since I was late now. Ooh, the later you get, the traffic begins to jam even more,
Mhm.
and then it's harder to find a parking place. The later you get, the later you get. So I went around the block a couple of times and suddenly I come running into the school. I'm 15 minutes late. And I said, I know I told everybody not to be late. And here I am. I'm late. I'm sorry. Everybody, let's find our seats. And they jump into their seats. And I didn't realize I forgot to take my
To take
kippah
it off.
off. And some kid in the back of the room says, "What's that thing for, man? Protection?" And everybody had a good laugh at my expense. And I realized if I would have taken it off myself, that would be okay. But to have it laughed off my head or to whisk it
Mm.
off at that moment felt disingenuous. And so I decided I'm just going to compose myself. I took a deep breath and I said to them with perfect equanimity, just in the same mindset I was on that Friday night when the rabbi said it, I said, "This is to remind me," I told them, "that I live in God's world."
Wow.
And the
Wow.
place got so silent. There was there's a pregnant pause. We were expecting quadruplets over here. I'm telling you.
Wow.
Nobody knew what to say. I'd never heard it before, and they didn't. They
Right.
certainly never heard that before. They didn't know what to say in response. And there was one in the third row. I remember an olive-skinned girl, Macy. I remember she had a little sparkle in her eye, and she broke the silence and she said, "Word, man." word. Back then that was like a fist pump or something like that. So I said,
Oh,
and everybody sort of relaxed. I went down the row and I slapped five with everybody, and that became now this is my new, mo. I'm wearing the Armaka, and I felt
wow.
beforehand like one of these Picasso, pictures, like cubist art, trying to be everything to everybody on the outside, but nothing to myself, no core. Once I
Mm.
put on the Armaka, then I felt those fissures starting to heal, and I feel like I'm one. I'm courageous. I'm powerful. I'm a son of Abraham. I live in God's world,
Wow.
and
You
everything.
found your center. Wow.
Just with those few points, and now I'm wearing a yarmulke on my head. But I also realize I represent much more than I
Mhm.
know, because I went
Mhm.
out with some friends on a Friday night. I was the small man in the big man's club. 6'7", 6'8".
Right.
Me, all of only 6 feet. So we went out to a Chinese restaurant on a Friday night, and we're sitting over there, and I have my yarmulke on my head, and we have the menus in front of us, and then some guy a few tables away. I don't know where this guy came from. Central Casting. I don't know, whatever. He suddenly looks up at me and he says, "What are you doing here?" He says, "This is not a kosher restaurant. And it's Shabbos." He says to me like that. And suddenly, I said, "Guys, we got to get out of here." And
Wow.
they said, "But we didn't order." I said, "Good, we didn't order. Let's go." We got in the cab and we left. I forgot to ask at that time, but it occurred to me, what's he doing there?
Right.
I thought
Right.
later on maybe he's the mashgiach,
Right. Wow.
but it left me with this unsettled feeling like I represent more than I know. This is not
Mhm.
right. But my job continued. At some point, the job discontinued because the fellow who was supposed to be paying the vendors and the rent and everything, he was putting it from his right pocket into his left pocket, and the
Mhm.
feds got involved, and he ran Venezuela, and the school that was ready to my job was ready to be get continue funding was suddenly taken away,
Mm.
and but in that same period of time, I have cousins that were in the that had I had heard about them. They moved out to Seattle,
Mhm.
and they sent their children to Denver yeshivas. And there was a daughter that was looking for relatives in the East because she was about to get engaged, and she wanted to invite some of the relatives, from some of her father's relatives. And so she went through the phone book and she found my uncle and aunt
Mhm.
in Queens, and she called them up. And it was a family birthday party, and she came to me with a number. She goes, "I just got this call from, I think she's a religious girl. She's a nut. You're a nut." So she
Uh-huh.
gave. So it was pretty disparaging. So maybe you give a call. So I gave a call, and they invited me for another Shabbos in Borough Park, and she got engaged, and her brother Eliyahu showed up. So I started meeting now other family members, and this fellow Eliyahu was a very quiet, focused fellow, and where he was learning in Lakewood, they called him the Rosh Yeshiva called him the Baal Shtika, the master of silence. Even
Mm.
today, you can't get him to talk about when you're learning other subjects. No politics, no sports, no nothing. He's like a laser beam, and he was walking around me the whole Shabbos, whispering like post hypnotic suggestions. He was not even talking directly to me. He was like behind me saying, "Why don't you go Or Sameach? Why don't you go to Or Sameach? Or Sameach?" I think, or
Wow.
what? What's the other option? I didn't know what he's talking about. And where I grew up with Italians, directly, "You talking to me?" I told him, "You talking to me?"
Right.
And when I turned around, he wasn't saying anything. The minute my back was to him, suddenly he started. Why didn't you go to? So that's how that Shabbos went. I said, okay. And then there was the Ufruf in Muncie. So I
Mm.
came, and he continued with his whisperings. And then one day, I was a month later, I was at home, and I got myself my own blood pressure machine. Now, I was taking,
You
and I was
kept filling?
like to fill in, and I was writing and thinking, and I had my own way of going through the sitter and everything, and reading Perky Avos. I had a nice sitter from Crown Heights, the Nusach Hari in English. I forget now. I have it. The Tehillas Hashem. It was
Mhm.
delicious. I was enjoying every word. The translations. It was much better.
Mm.
A big upgrade from the Birnbaum.
Right.
And and then one day was a knock at the door, I said, "Uh-oh," in my mother's house in Westchester County where I was living at that time. I said, "Okay." So I go to the door and I said, "Yeah, what's, hello?" And I hear, like, he said, we want to talk to you." I was thinking to myself, "Oh, the feds." I
Right.
said, I was in the educational department. I was not in the finances at all.
Right.
They said, "No, we want to talk to you about reading the Bible." Okay, I know who these guys are. I don't know who they are specifically, but we know this.
Missionaries, right.
Yeah, yeah. So I said, so I'm kind of reading the Bible right now. That's not how you get rid of them, by the way. They get all excited. Yeah, yeah, let's talk, let's talk. So I'm wearing the tefillin and everything. So I open up the door, like, I'm standing behind the door as if like I'm wearing a robe. I can't, but I open up the door now and there I am, with my tefillin. I see this nice, handsome, clean cut two guys, a black kid and a white kid, with the little thin ties and the Bible tucked under their arm and those big teethy smiles like they fell off the Kashi cereal
Right.
box. Yeah, yeah. And when they see me with the tefillin on top of my head, so their jaws opened up.
Ah.
They looked at each other. It was a classic double take. They like, and nobody said a word. They started running like the
Wow.
lion in the Wizard of Oz. Like the tails were on fire,
Hmm.
and they just ran up the block like, and I took a step on the front stoop and I watched them go up and around the corner over there from Six Fairway Drive, a golf course across the street. And when they disappeared out of sight, I said to myself, why don't I go to Ros and Mac? Suddenly that
Mm.
idea, and I found out where this place is in Muncie. There was a fledgling little Balchuva campus over there, and I made my way up. So I came. I put on a three-piece suit like I'm going on a major job interview,
Mhm.
and I met the Rosh Hashiva, and I saw these guys wearing jeans and sneakers, and they were learning the squiggly lines
Mm.
with proficiency and excitement. And I said, that's what I wanted. He said, why don't you come back for Shabbos? So I came back on Shabbos with my jeans and my sneakers, and I saw everybody getting into their suits, getting ready for Shabbos. And I walked around
Mm.
like a hokey guy for, Shabbos with overalls, I think. And nobody said anything to me. They were perfectly accepting of that. And then after that Shabbos, I came back the next week with my jeans and my sneakers for the week, and my suit for Shabbos. They ended up staying in yeshiva for the next 4 or 5 years,
Wow.
and it wasn't easy though. It wasn't like, oh, suddenly the lights go on. It was hard. Getting up early in the
Mhm.
morning, Rashi script.
Mhm.
It was like climbing in the night, getting up every morning, and
And
I
learning everything from scratch and
learning
learning
everything. The rabbi's
are you
kid, it's humiliating. Know 10,000
sure.
times more than you. I thought I was
Right.
smart and intellectual. When you learn the Mishnah, you think you
Mhm.
understand it. Then you learn the Gemara, and you go, I don't, it was like real thinking, real hard work thinking, and I felt out of shape mentally and out of shape,
Mhm.
and I realized there's a lot of work to be done over here. Aramaic, Rashi script, and there were many times I wanted to run to the hills, but when I saw the families around the table, and on a Friday night, I went to go to one
Mhm.
rabbi. He had 14 children around the table, Inky, Dinky, Louie, and Dewey, everybody harmonizing together. I just told him the other day, I went to visit last Friday with my wife, and I said, when I saw that, I said I would come home at night, I'd have enjoy myself to the heights, and I'd come home and I'd cry myself to sleep and punch the pillow and say, I want that for myself.
Mhm.
I want that.
Wow. Wow.
I don't care if I have to learn Aramaic or eat glass, and I don't tell you which one
Mm.
was more flavorful at that time, but you know,
Right.
but
Right.
you know,
But
but
you wanted that.
I
You
wanted
saw a
that.
vision of what you wanted. Wow.
And if that's what it takes to get to there, then that's then I'm gonna do that. I don't care how long it takes. And so,
So I'm
yeah,
just curious, now that you have that, do you look back at your life and say, you know, do you have any regrets?
absolutely 100% no way, Jose. I feel blessed. If there would be an opposite of the word regret, that's what I have. I have nothing but gratitude, and I feel like I don't know why me. I don't know why. I have a couple of friends that followed along also, that once they
Mhm.
got a taste and once they got a flavor, they said, this is where it's at, and they built families and they built
Mm.
a future, and it turns out my mother and my stepfather came along and they became Shomer Shabbos,
Oh, wow.
and by the time they
Wow.
passed on, the Roses and the Macs, none of them even had a grandchild, not even one.
Mm. Mm.
And
Wow.
when my mother passed away, she had 17 great grandchildren.
Wow.
around her.
That's
Uh,
amazing. That's
I have so
beautiful.
I have some pictures I can show. This is me when I was 16 years old or something like that.
Oh,
A
wow.
passport photo. We were going to Venezuela to play baseball. Right here, I was in high school, football
Wow.
in the summer. In football, I was 80% of my body weight was neck at that time.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Okay,
Do you
yeah.
do
I'm
do
sorry.
you still play no, you could show us. Do you still play sports? Do you still
Yeah,
play
yeah.
any sports?
I can still shoot 50 foul shots in a row.
Wow.
And from the perimeter also. I feel I can turn it on. Sometimes my limbs don't cooperate the way they used to.
Right.
Right? Here I pitched a one hitter after 1 day's rest, a two hitter followed by a one hitter. Uh,
So those are great pictures,
yeah.
looking now that you have your children and you have your grandchildren, how do you inspire them?
And the truth is, um, I think the goal of education is to create we call a Kli Rishon. Here's a picture of one of the
Oh,
we've had
wow. Look
you
at
know
that
it,
beautiful family.
yeah, that's even just part. This thing, it's like a wedding cake. Uh,
Wow.
one of the close relative of mine used to, not everybody was supportive of what was going on while I was doing
I'm
this.
sure.
And I used to end one conversation all the time with with this refrain: "You could have been a senator.
Yeah.
You could have done something with your life." And it was like, that you could hear the head shaking. I said, "I love you too. Bye."
Right.
But this person who, kept on saying that over and over again, like, shaking the head like you disappeared from the scene for so many years. Now you're living this, separate life or whatever it is. When they came to the wedding and they saw and they experienced the love of the kids and the grandkids,
Mhm.
they said, "Wow, you really did something here. You really did something,"
Wow.
and they felt it. So, I think my kids are inspired. I just think that they say Yiddishkeit is caught, it's not taught.
Mhm.
And if they sense that we're enthusiastic, my wife and I are enthusiastic about what we're doing, then they're enthusiastic. And now that they
Mm.
have their own children, they realize, that it takes some effort and it takes your own personal enthusiasm to get other people enthused. You can't talk about it, you can't teach it, you can only model it. And when they see that
Wow.
you're interested in davening and learning and teaching, and that's what you're doing, then they're all doing the same thing wherever they are, wherever they find themselves on the planet. They're
Oh.
great, and I think they have an advantage in certain ways. I got this dad who's a Baal Tshuva, but at the same time, they say, they feel like, wow. I think they feel proud. I never hid or tried to just cover up and say, that's that's what that was then. That now, no, they realize I tell them stories about I went through this, I did that, I hitchhiked, I did that,
Mhm.
and I found my way here, and I think that itself is inspiring to different audiences that I speak to, and to my kids as well.
Sure. For sure. What was it hard navigating raising children in a religious environment when you didn't have that background yourself?
That's a profound question. The truth is, I didn't have it. My wife grew up an only child, also of Holocaust survivors, so we never saw it. So it's hard to
Mhm.
repeat and model something that you never saw. But I went to Rebbeim, and
Mm.
part of it being interested in learning was not just interested in learning from books, but being a part of a family, and the Rebbeim open up their homes and open up their houses and let me come and stay and drive them and help them and be a part of their family and be part amongst their kids. And I saw how a I was taking notes in my mind all the time about
Mhm.
this is how it's done, and I was practicing things that I saw, how they spoke and how they conducted themselves and how they navigated certain, this one didn't want to sit in the right seat. And I was taking mental
Mhm.
notes all the time. These are great Talmud scholars who are now
Mhm.
living it. So it was like a
Mm.
symphony. And I realized I was witnessing a symphony. They were building it in front of me and working the orchestra and conducting it. And I was watching with and taking careful mental notes. After I started raising a family, I wish I could go back there sometimes and 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 see it again. I
Right.
think a lot of those things that we plus we have teachers. Having teachers to go
Right.
and ask questions to is very, very important. I meet too many people that are blundering around trying to figure out the answers to everything by themselves. I go back to those teachers. I say, so what should we do? What do we,
Right.
you know,
What do you think was your biggest challenge along your whole trek?
um, I would say the biggest challenge is the biggest challenge. I'm just trying to think. I think catching up and learning is probably
Mm.
the
Mm.
biggest challenge, and gaining an
Mhm.
appreciation for the Talmud.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
was not so interested in a cow goring another cow. I know we're learning
Mhm.
principles over there. I had a peace plan for the cows, that they should get along with
Mhm.
each other.
Mhm.
I was interested in Hasidus, I'll tell you the truth. I was interested in putting a giant puzzle
Right.
together, putting the outside of the puzzle first, because that would help me now appreciate what's going on the inner part of the puzzle, because
Well,
that
I know you did study Hasidic teachings quite a bit. I know you
yeah,
still do.
yeah.
Could you tell us something from that that inspires you?
Um, One of the things that just wakes me up every day, and that is the idea that there's nothing other than Hashem.
Mhm.
Leis asar panuya mere. There's no place. Not where is Hashem, but where isn't Hashem. There's no
Mhm.
place that there's not Hashem. The world, every moment is a ray of eternity. Everything, and Hashem is real, and life is real because of Hashem. And because we relate to Hashem, then that makes our life meaningful. That gives meaning to our life. So I mean, there's nothing more important than that. Not about following a code of law, which is very important also. Both things are
Mm.
important. I learn the Chavos Levavos every day, where he explains, we need a training ground. We need the structure and the bones and but the inside, the heart
Mhm.
is to understand and appreciate that, wow, we're interacting with Hashem when we're interacting with people, and we're interacting.
Mm.
If the Baal Shem tells us, if you love the kinder, you love the tata. If you so
Mhm.
by loving other Jews, that's a way of showing that we love Hashem. Kids
Mhm.
ask me all the time, do I have to? I give an assignment. Do you have to? Do you have to? I says only two things you have to. You have to Hashem Elokecha. You have to l'reacha kamocha. You have to love Hashem, and you have to love other Jews, and those are the two have tos. That's what we have. So that
Wow.
just
That's
having,
interesting.
yeah,
That was what inspired you with Manus Freeman in the beginning, and that's what
yeah,
still inspires
yeah,
you
yeah,
today.
yeah.
Wow.
That's the big idea. That's the big
Right.
idea that Avram Avinu had. That's the big rock that fell into the ocean over there. He introduced the concept of Hashem Echad to the world. That's the one.
Mhm.
There it is. We can't avoid it. And
Mhm.
if we're living without that idea, so then it doesn't penetrate the heart. It's not coming from the heart. It's not entering the heart. So to me, that was important. That
Mhm.
whatever I do with passion. That's my thing. I played sports with all my, my uniform
Right.
was the dirtiest at the end of the game. I gave everything I had, and the same thing
Right.
also when
You
it came
really
to
did.
Yiddishkeit
Wow.
and
That's
learning about,
incredible.
I have to feel like I can put my everything into it, and that's what I was looking for more than just the mechanics. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Mm.
Okay, last question. What would you advise someone who's watching this, who is on their path or thinking about taking a path or thinking of taking a step forward in any area of their life? What would you advise?
Um, that is, I think is to take notes. Keep
Mm.
careful self notes.
Do you have those yellow
I
pads?
have the yellow pads, and I have
Really? Wow.
I have loads of other books now of this size. I have
Wow.
a bucket filled with them. But just the writing down, and so it just doesn't remain ethereal. Keeping track of where I'm at right now. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Asking myself questions, and to learn what you love to learn. Learn what you love to
Mhm,
learn.
mhm,
Not and to go a little bit out of the comfort zone. Be willing to challenge yourself out of your comfort zone, and keep going. Keep going. It's not a straight climb. There's ups, there's downs, there's people who encourage you, people who discourage you, but to keep going. Some people stopped in the middle. Unfortunately, I don't think they didn't make it. And
mhm,
it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to drop out.
mhm,
But to keep going, just to keep going, and enjoy the process. Enjoy the process. That's also, it should be a delicious process. Not about getting to a certain point. It's about enjoying the process and honoring the process and feeling good and happy. I always tell people, if you go to a bookstore, which shelf are you going to standing next to? If I give you $1,000 to spend in a farm in a bookstore, a Jewish bookstore, like, what would you take off the shelf? And if you studied that subject for the
Mhm.
next 5 years, you'd probably be one of the greatest experts on that subject if you focused on one thing and stayed with it for 5 years. So stay with it, and let's see where that interest takes you. The Talmud says, "Ein adam lomed el masha chafetz libo." A person only learns that what he's interested in. So whatever we're interested in, we should,
Mhm.
indulge yourself in it. Spoil yourself with ruchnias. One of the things I did with my kids, the line I picked up:
With
spoil them with
spirituality.
spoil your children with spirituality. Spoil yourself with spirituality. That's my advice. Don't be worried it's too much.
Beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Rabbi Lam, thank you so much for joining us. That was a fascinating story, and I
Okay.
wish you and your beautiful, beautiful family only continued nachas and only continued happiness and success in everything that you do. Thank you so much for
And
joining
thank you
us.
for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Wow, that was a great, great story from Rabbi Lam. I love how he speaks. I love how he explained it. He was so funny. I thought his jokes were really incredible and how he expresses himself. What really stood out for me was that son of Abraham right at the beginning, finding out that he was that son of Abraham, what it did for him. But the most important part was really when he was told by Rabbi Manis Freeman, "You are in God's world." And I thought that was just like such a aha moment where, sometimes we think that we have to put God in our own world. And this was a real reminder that we are in God's world. And what are we doing for God in terms of making this world a better place for Him? So that was really an incredible story. I'm wondering what you thought about that. I thought he spoke so well and gave such good advice about a person just staying true to themselves and keeping notes, keeping your own notes, talking to yourself, listening to your inner self. I guess that was his way of really expressing himself, was through those yellow pads that he had and that black pad, just expressing yourself, thinking about what it is you're questioning, and then finding and seeking the guidance that you need. There was so many incredible points and coincidences, so to speak, coincidences along his journey that really brought him to where he was. It was obvious that God's hand was really leading him to become the person that he has become. And I guess that's true in all of our lives. It's God's hand leading us, and those coincidences in our lives, those questions that we might have, those thoughts that we might be pondering on or that might be bothering us, which are leading us to really find our purpose and mission here in this world. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. Also, we are on all podcast platforms, as you know, so you could find us there. Thank you so much for watching. Leave us a question, leave us a comment. We love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching and being part of this extraordinary community.